Monday, early August a few years ago. As the chief engineer for a design-build construction firm, I had to travel out of town several times a month when problems arose. This week was no exception. My flight was leaving Hartsfield-Jackson at 7:21 the next morning. Given Atlanta's traffic, I'd have to get up around 4 a.m., so Monday afternoon I left work a little early and headed home. Work in Baton Rouge went south as I expected, and I spent all of Tuesday afternoon and evening and half the day Wednesday helping to get things back on track. I think Etherly, our on-site project manager, learned something in the process, but we'll be watching him more closely in the future. Wednesday afternoon, I headed back to the I-10 freeway to meet up with my coworkers in New Orleans. Mary Jo Pilecki, whom I had helped train in Atlanta a few years earlier, was now the construction manager in Orleans and was scheduled to go on maternity leave in another month or two. So, because she was a friend of mine, and because of her impending absence, I kept a close eye on her project to make sure that everything was documented so that the person who would succeed her would have clear instructions on what needed to be done. As I expected, Mary Jo had everything in order. So after dinner with Mary Jo and Ozzy, her husband, on Wednesday night, and a planning meeting with her and her staff early Thursday morning, I caught a Louis Armstrong flight and then made my way through Atlanta traffic to arrive at my office by 1:45. I reported to Mr. Strickland, my boss, on the situation with the project in Baton Rouge, my recommendations for increased supervision of the team at the site, and how Mary Jo and her team had done in New Orleans. He agreed with my suggestions for Baton Rouge, asked a few questions about the change in leadership when Mary Jo went on vacation, and then told me to take the rest of the day off after I submitted my expense report. Once in my office, I quickly finished it and said, "Done." I reached for my phone to text Reagan that I would be home early before heading out the door. At that moment, Ethan Gardner, my best friend since third grade and co-worker for the past 6 years, walked into my office and closed the door behind him. "Hey, Trent. How was your trip?" "Long but productive. Etherly should be able to keep things under control in Baton Rouge for the rest of the project if he keeps a better eye on his supervisors. But right now I'm tired and I've had enough, so even though I love you like a brother, Ethan, Mr. Strickland told me to get out of here." His face darkened at those words, and I laughingly explained, "No, he didn't fire me. It's just that I spent so many hours on a business trip helping them clean up the mess that Mr. S told me to take the day off to try to stay on the plus side of all you guys in accounting. So I'm going to run to the store, buy some flowers and a bottle of wine, and be in a good mood for her when Reagan gets home. Anything work-related can wait until tomorrow." To my surprise, Ethan raised his hand and said rather forcefully, "Trent, stop it. This isn't about work." "I'm sorry, buddy, but I really need to talk to you now. It's, well, about Reagan. She's..." "What? What's wrong with Reagan?" Fear pierced my heart. Something had happened to her, and no one could contact me because I was on the damn airplane. But why hadn't anyone called me since then? When I interrupted him, he stammered, "Trent, she's messing with you while you're traveling." Anger lit up my face as I looked at the guy I'd considered my best friend practically forever. Reagan told me that in college and the years that followed, she was a true free spirit, enjoying it always and everywhere. But when we got more serious and started talking about a life together, she put those days behind her, saw a therapist for a while, and decided to settle down and start a family. Even though she was with me, she still loved sex, a lot, but she had definitely put her free days behind her. That's not funny, Ethan. It's not funny in the slightest, and I don't appreciate it. I think you better get out of here and seriously consider our friendship before you walk into my office again. His face looked pained as he replied, "I know it's not funny, Trent, and I hate to tell you more than you might know, but I really think it's true. I found out about it from Jake Campbell, who found out about it from his friend Clay, who found out about it from his friend. Clay's friend was someone she was having fun with. From what she casually told him afterward, he wasn't the only one she was doing things with, which is why he didn't keep it a secret. It pissed him off that she was cheating on him. I knew it wasn't true, that it couldn't be true, and I was so furious that I was ready to rip Ethan's head off for falling for such a stupid joke. However, I knew my wife much better than Ethan did, and so my anger turned on those who spread such a lie and the nameless jerk who started it. Come to think of it, I wasn't giving Ethan a pass either. What's more, I was doubly angry that my supposedly best friend was helping them spread shit like this. "Ethan, I'm going to tell you this once. It's not true, Not one word of it. And if you ever, I mean ever, repeat a word of it, I'll beat the hell out of you. Now you'd better get out of here before I decide to do it anyway. Ethan was 6 feet tall and weighed 150 pounds, if not more. He had always been a skinny kid, a typical nerd, so he knew that I with my size could do it if I wanted to. The whole world seemed to rest on his shoulders as he looked at the ground and shook his head slowly. He looked up at me and I could see the pain in his eyes. Trent, I'm sorry. We've been best friends for a long time, so you know I would never want to hurt you, but I really think that by not telling you, you'll end up hurting a lot more. And buddy, you know that I know you well enough to know that you would react exactly like this. You've always had a temper, and how many times have I had to step in and calm you down to keep you from getting arrested or worse in high school? Trent, I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't think it was true. I'm leaving, but, this way. You may not believe me, but here's the name of the investigator my cousin hired when he thought his wife was cheating on him. This lady is good looking, and if she tells you Reagan did something wrong, know it's the gospel truth. I took a deep breath and held my breath for a moment, willing the blood rushing in my temples to calm down a bit. I'm not sure it worked, but it helped me clear my thoughts and put things in a better light. Ethan was right. We'd been best friends since his family had moved next door when we were little, and we'd been close ever since. We were both smart. I was the salutatorian of our high school class in the North Georgia mountains, finishing second to him. But he was the poised nerd who kept us out of trouble when he could, and I was the flashy athlete who physically pulled us out of a few messes when his efforts didn't work. We went to different colleges, me to engineering with a construction management bias at the Institute of Technology, and him to accounting at UGA. Over time, I matured a lot without his help in managing my temper, although I must admit that a few extra bumps along the way without his guidance helped the process. When I heard about a vacancy in my firm's accounting department, I let him know how much I liked the firm. To my surprise, he applied and I put in a good word for him, so we've been working together for 6 years now, including all the time Reagan and I dated before getting married almost 5 years ago. Looking back, I realized that while I didn't think for a minute that his story was true, Ethan must have been led to believe it was true, and that he was telling me to protect me, not to intentionally hurt me. Exhaling slowly, I asked, "Your cousin's wife? Was she?" "Oh, yes. And Miss Hightower made inquiries about her." "And what happened to them?" Ethan grimaced. "He divorced her whore, but he still has to see her twice a week when they exchange children. He loves those kids and will do anything to protect them, and that's a damn good thing, because he hates her so much he'd probably have destroyed her by now and happily gone to death row otherwise. I'm so sorry, man." After answering the phone, he walked out of my office, closing the door behind him. I was left alone to mull over his crazy accusations and what he'd said about his cousin. I felt sorry for the guy who had a woman he loved and trusted who did this to him. However, not knowing the circumstances, I mostly sympathized with the kids. They didn't choose their parents and the mess they were born into. The reason was that Reagan and I were discussing the imminent expansion of our family. We wanted a boy and a girl if the genetic odds stacked in our favor, but were considering 3 children if our chromosomes matched in the first 2 tries. I sat at the table looking at the door for a couple minutes, trying to calm myself down before packing up and heading out. I drove home to my wife, trying to put everything Ethan had said out of my mind. Unfortunately, the seed he'd planted was festering, not wanting to be forgotten as I pulled onto the highway to head home. No, I didn't believe it, not for a minute. More than that, I absolutely refused to believe it, and it would all seem ridiculous to me if it wasn't so serious. As I drove north on I-75 to my exit, I thought about telling Reagan about this foolishness, but something stopped me. Although I was sure it wasn't true, there was no reason to make her angry that people, including Ethan, were telling such horrible lies about her. After a quick stop at the grocery store, I remained silent as Reagan threw herself into my arms as I entered the kitchen from the garage. "You're home early," I said. But it was no more than what I could say as our lips came together, and we tried to make up for missing each other since Tuesday morning. When we separated, she nodded. "I thought you'd be back early, so I worked late the last 2 nights so I could leave early today to greet you." "God, I missed you so much, Trent," she cooed. I smirked back at her, thinking about how beautiful she was, how funny she was, and what utter shit that idiot friend of Ethan's, or friend of a friend, or whatever. I knew for a fact that Reagan loved me and would never cheat on me. With that being said, I shook my head and put Ethan's stupid story out of my head. Ethan and I had been friends for so long that I realized he would never have told me everything the way he did if he didn't believe it himself. Reagan was soon asleep in bed, a satisfied smile on her face as she dozed off. I sat up in bed trying to read my book, but the words on the page refused to be picked up by my brain. My thoughts were preoccupied with my wife and the impossible story my best friend had told me. As much as Reagan loved me, the Monday before the trip, and today after I returned home, I knew that the messages he had received were fake and that I had to prove it to him or it would jeopardize our friendship even more than his supposed warning. I went to bed that night still trying to figure out what to do, but as I was driving to work Friday morning, it hit me. I would contact the private investigator Ethan had suggested. However, I wouldn't be calling her to make her prove that Reagan had cheated on me. No, without believing it, I would ask Miss Private Investigator to prove that Reagan had not cheated. Friday morning, I called Donna Hightower's office and agreed to the first available appointment on Monday afternoon. The office was in Midtown, so I left myself a little extra time and walked into the office about 10 minutes before 2. Before marrying Reagan, I had been well employed for several years and kept my large investment account in my own name, which allowed me to surprise her from time to time with gifts or trips without her knowledge. This time I would use some of the funds to hire an investigator, so Reagan would never have to find out about the silly rumor when Miss Hightower proved it false. At 2 o'clock, I was summoned by a secretary and escorted to a conference room at the end of the hallway where a rather statuesque black woman dressed in strict black slacks, an expensive white blouse, and a red scarf rose from behind a desk to greet me as soon as the girl closed the door behind me. Good afternoon, Mr. J-Rowe. Welcome to the Hightower Private Detective Service. I'm Donna Hightower. How can we help you? She was tall and very good-looking. Her grip was strong, and I guessed she'd kept herself in great shape since, according to her firm's website, she'd retired from the police force a few years ago. From her online bio, I figured she was in her mid-50s, though she seemed younger in person. She smiled warmly, but her eyes kept scrutinizing me, picking up on my body language as I suspected, as well as whether I was secretly wearing anything. Hello, Miss Hightower. I'm Trent J-Rowe, and I appreciate you meeting with me on such short notice. My problem is relatively simple. In an average month, I travel 2 or 3 times, usually for 1 or 2 nights. As a result, someone has made up a story about my wife cheating on me. I want you to investigate and prove that this is not true, that she has not been cheating. She expressionlessly began asking me questions, and over the next short period of time, I told her everything I knew about the allegation and much about Reagan, while realizing that the problem might not be as simple as I had previously thought. Her questions were insightful, and she asked several questions to clarify or get additional information, taking brief notes along the way, particularly about Reagan's sexual history, both before our relationship began and in our life together. I felt devastated when she finally put aside her pen and said, "Thank you for that information, Mr. J-Rowe. According to the client information sheet you filled out before coming in, you have a bachelor's and master's degree in engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology. How familiar are you with the philosophy, our legal system, and in particular the burden of proof?" That was a question I hadn't expected. I had an introductory philosophy course when I was an undergrad, and I've been a witness in a couple of court cases at my firm. But as far as the details and substance of your question, no, not very much. She nodded. You came to me with a specific request to prove that your wife was not having an affair. Mr. J-Rowe, that is what is called proving a negative. In some cases, you can prove that something did not happen. For example, a particular wine glass was never broken because it holds wine, and you can visually verify that it is in perfect condition with no cracks. That's easy, but what about a person? She seemed to think for a moment before continuing. Let's see. I can prove that I didn't go out of town and rob a bank yesterday because I have a positive alibi to prove that I was here in town all day. But what about one day last week? Last year? Or even 10 years ago? You see, Mr. J-Rowe, in most cases, there are no ironclad records for any significant period of time that can prove a negative. So let's apply that to your case. I can have one of my investigators observe your wife for a week or even a month and tell you with reasonable certainty that she did not have, or, as the case may be, had an affair during that time. But I cannot prove that she did not have an affair the day or week or perhaps several years before our investigation began. For that reason, proving a negative doesn't work in your case. So the cloud of this silly accusation really will hang over her head forever, I muttered, in the back of my mind already realizing that what Miss Hightower said was true. Perhaps, but if we watch her under the right circumstances and nothing happens, we can infer from her actions, which she will or will not take, that something is probably true. We will be able to say with certainty that she either did or did not walk away from you while being watched, and this will also allow us to find evidence of her past behaviors, if any. Most importantly, however, we will never be able to say with certainty that she never did. If that scenario works for you, Mr. Gyro, we'll be happy to take your case. If not, we wish you well and good luck finding an honest man who will do what you ask. Realizing where she was going with this, I hired Hightower's private investigation service and then spent another couple of hours with one of Miss Hightower's investigators, answering more questions, filling out a bio, and planning for those appropriate circumstances she was talking about. I had been working in the Atlanta office all week, so on Saturday night, after Reagan went to bed, my circuit breaker in the basement panel board tripped. I didn't notice anything Sunday morning, but by the time we got home from church and lunch with a few new members, the house was noticeably hotter. Reagan immediately complained, and I said I would go downstairs and check the circuit breaker. I flipped a few circuits that didn't make a difference, turned it off and on again, and then went back upstairs. I didn't find anything wrong, so I'm going to call the HVAC service. Please. If you don't, it's going to be too hot to sleep in there tonight. I dialed the number for our regular HVAC service company and logged into their automated system, pushing buttons, going from menu to menu until I was on the line for almost 2 minutes and then hung up. I then called the number Donna Hightower had given me. Hello, this is Trent Giro. We're having a problem with the air conditioning upstairs. How soon can you send someone over to check it out? Tomorrow morning at 10? Okay, I think that'll do it. Thanks, see you then. Reagan stepped in to listen to the end. It's too hot upstairs, so we'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight. It'll be like we're in a hotel room, she added with a smirk. Taking Reagan's suggestion into consideration, and I felt better than I had at any time since Ethan had handed her the idiotic accusation. There was no way Reagan could love me so much and still do what that asshole claiming to be confused about her did. We got up Monday morning and Reagan made me take the sheets off and throw them in the wash on the way to the shower. Monday morning I worked from home and met with the HVAC guy, a subcontractor who is regularly engaged by Hightower's private investigative service, at 10 o'clock as planned. I showed him our house and he got to work while I went downstairs and turned on the light switch. An hour later he was done. They are motion activated and stay on for 5 minutes after the motion ends. They have a fiber optic lens with a wide angle of view, so they can record anything you need with very little chance of being noticed unless someone has a special reason to look for them. These babies will capture everything, with quality good enough for legal purposes, but not good enough if you want to make any movies for your own or public consumption online. 3 in your bedroom, 1 in each of the other rooms, and 1 on the bathroom door. If anything happens within sight of any of them, we'll record it. After paying him for the installation and 2 weeks' rent, I thanked him and went to work. When I got home, it was chilly in the house, but it wasn't cold for me. Babe, there were some problems with the hotel job in Orlando, so I'll have to add it to this week's trip. I was already going to be in Tampa Tuesday night, but decided to visit Orlando as well. Loretta made arrangements with the airlines very quickly, so my flight from Orlando won't arrive until late Friday night. I'll try to change to an earlier flight if something is available, but Loretta said the chances of that are pretty slim. I'm really sorry. I'm really going to miss you, Reagan said, but let's try to catch up at least a little. Smirking, she took my hand and led me to the couch in the family room. I love you, Trent. I love you too, Reagan, I replied, meaning it. I smiled, realizing that there was nothing wrong with our marriage except some idiot who would never know what it was like to make love to my woman. The meetings in Tampa went well, and the follow-up issues in Orlando were easy. In fact, I usually handled them remotely, but my showing up on site helped keep our management team on track. Once everything was settled, I spent some time on site observing the quality of construction, making observations and pointing out problems and potential pitfalls to the assistant project manager who showed me around. He was young but bright, and I mentally noted that he would soon be ready for more responsibility. I could leave Thursday afternoon if I could find a flight, but I didn't bother trying. Reagan wasn't expecting me until Friday night, and I was going to give her every possible minute of that time to prove to Miss Hightower that she had ample opportunity, but she wouldn't cheat on me. So I worked in my hotel room until noon, and early Thursday evening I went to one of Orlando's famous gun ranges, where in addition to the usual pistols and rifles, machine guns can be rented for firing from 3 points within seconds. I limited myself to renting a couple of pistols and let the tourist dads, torn away from their kids and Disney or Universal scenes for a while, spend their hard-earned money feeding belching machine guns. Friday, I worked in a trailer at our construction site until it was time to head to the airport. The traffic on I-285 Friday night was probably as bad as downtown, and it wasn't much better on 75 either. I breathed a sigh of relief when I finally reached our exit, and was thrilled when I walked into the house and my loving wife threw herself into my arms. Seeing that I looked stressed, she brought me a beer and we snuggled together on the couch and talked for a while before she took me upstairs. On Saturday, Reagan went to the gym to work out, and I took care of the yard. Since I didn't have much time, after going inside to get a drink of water and watch the Braves game, I opened my laptop and checked my personal email account. To my relief, there was nothing there from the special address that Donna Hightower's investigator had given me. I checked again on Sunday afternoon while she ran some errands and did some shopping. This time I blinked tensely a few times before hesitantly clicking on the message to open it. As I did so, I muttered, "Please, Lord, let this just be an update. Dear Mr. J-Rowe, your order will be ready on Monday at 11 a.m. Please contact our office to arrange for delivery. Larson Toolworks." My hand shook as I closed the message, deleted it, and then permanently deleted it from my trash folder. Reagan noticed I didn't look well when she got home, and I avoided her kisses. "Yeah, I don't feel so good," I replied. "I don't want you to get sick too. Let me give you a hug and then you lie down while I make dinner. Hopefully you'll feel better and be able to eat in a little while." She hugged me, but I, worried beyond belief, only stroked her back and rested my head against her. As I did so, I caught the scent of flowers. I didn't eat Sunday night, and I got up very early Monday morning. I thought about it while trying to sleep. The smell of flowers in her hair was not her usual shampoo, conditioner, or perfume. I didn't want to believe that something was going on, but the unusual odor and the ominous message made me question whether something could really be going on. After all, she'd been gone for so long, right? No, she couldn't have had time to shop and do anything extraneous. Right? Yeah, it had to be one of those makeup bags that spray perfume samplers in the store. After confirming the appointment on Monday morning, I arrived at Miss Hightower's office just before 11 a.m. I was escorted into the same conference room as the first time, and as before, Miss Hightower greeted me. This time she waved toward a chair and said, "Mr. J-Rowe, we have concluded our investigation ahead of schedule, and I'm afraid I have some bad news." She slid the file folder toward me and leaned back in silence as I opened it. My world, always so orderly, crumbled around me as I skipped reading the report and went straight to the photos. There she was with a man in our bedroom. This was followed by another picture, but still in our bedroom. Wait! The guy in this picture doesn't look like the guy I see in the first one. Sorry. It's all in the report, but we documented her with 3 different guys in 4 encounters through Saturday, and yesterday afternoon we repeated the second encounter, this time at a private home. "What?" exclaimed I. The news and all the numbers stunned me. But she went shopping yesterday." Her look was serious. She nodded. "Mr. J-Rowe, Mrs. J-Rowe did some shopping on Saturday afternoon after her second meeting with lover number 2, and on Sunday she only went to the grocery store. You could have checked receipts or maybe a credit card if she didn't use cash." But she was going to the gym on Saturday," I whispered, still trying not to believe the evidence clearly laid out in front of me. Miss Hightower shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mr. J-Rowe. From the picture of her leaving the hotel with lover number 2, we believe she was doing gymnastics. But believe me, she was nowhere near a real gym." "How can that be?" I demanded, my anger finally overcoming disbelief. "Letting 3 different guys spend time with her in 1 week? And that doesn't mean I didn't take care of her before and after." Miss Hightower held up a hand to reassure me. "I'm not a psychiatrist, Mr. J-Rowe, just a damn good investigator and a pretty good judge of human character." Your wife seems a likely candidate for hypersexuality disorder, often called nymphomania in earlier years. She seems to be going way beyond the ordinary to do just that and cover up what she did so you wouldn't find out. Flowers, I sighed. The scent of flowers in her hair. She took a shower and washed her hair after seeing her boyfriend yesterday. Maybe, but judging by how long they were in there, most likely just washed it or sprayed it with something. From what we can tell by following her and watching the videos, she's an expert at what she does, and she's obsessed with appearance, even changing the sheets and linens on your bed between lovers. More than one spouse has been caught cheating when a stain or odor gives away a secret love. But in our bed, I began, remembering that she'd even changed the sheets in the guest bed just a week ago. Yes, 2 of the 3 nights you were gone, she did it in your bed. She takes her lover. Please don't call them that. Cheating, adulterous assholes is what they are. She hummed slightly and nodded in response to my comment. At least one, yes. We don't know the first one's name, and the third one isn't married, but assuming he knew of her marital status, that makes him an accessory to her adultery and an adulterer under state law. Now, the second one seems to be her regular, lover. Well, he's definitely a cheater and an adulterer. We were able to get his identity and found out he's married. Asshole, I sighed, opening the folder and rummaging through it until I found the page with his picture at the very top. My fists clenched, and all I had to do was keep from punching the desk. Damn. I think she's working with that asshole. I was just about to get to that. Noah Wooliver, 32, married, and as far as we can tell, became your wife's boss at her firm a few months ago. Being a large, important firm with multiple offices, they don't advertise their corporate management structure, so it's possible he works in another, possibly parallel department. I shook my head. No, you got that right. Mrs. Allenby was promoted, I think, in late spring, and Mr. Wooliver became her new manager. Reagan never called him by name and said he wasn't very social, so I haven't met him yet. But she pointed him out to me one day when I stopped by to pick her up when her car was in the shop. It was Miss Hightower's turn to shake her head, though it was a look of disbelief. Not very social with the spouses of his mistresses, no doubt, she grinned. A convenient excuse to keep you two apart. Anyway, Mr. Wolver has no priors or outstanding warrants, but he does have several unpaid parking tickets. Your wife met him at a bar Wednesday night and drove him to your house for a little over an hour, and then drove him back and let him out in her car, which is how we got his name from DMV records. We found his firm's information through a web search and professional networking on the internet. What a bastard, I sighed, clenching and unclenching my fists so I wouldn't accidentally break something, like my fingers. Miss Hightower continued. Take it easy, Mr. J-Rowe. We're not done yet. Further, she met with him at the hotel on Saturday afternoon, and then again yesterday, but this time, as I said, at the residence. According to the tax records, his residence is Mr. J-Rowe's. If Mrs. Wooliver had arrived a few minutes earlier, or your wife had left a few minutes later, Mrs. J-Rowe would probably be in play. Tuh! I hissed. Her game is already lost, but she just doesn't know it. You know, Miss Hightower, in my youth I was pretty wild and ran after any woman who showed interest. It took a while, but eventually I realized that it wasn't getting me anywhere. I needed something more, and I met Reagan just when I needed it. She admitted that she was the same way in college and that she'd had a few lovers along the way, but she said she loved me, that she wanted to settle down, that... I couldn't go on, and Miss Hightower patted my arm. I smiled weakly at her in gratitude and looked again at the sheet with Noah Wolverine's picture on it. My face hardened at the thought of what I would want to do to this cheating, lying, adulterous duplicitous. Miss Hightower grabbed my arm again, harder this time, forcing me to look into her eyes. Mr. J-Rowe, I'm very sorry for the way things turned out, but I must warn you, as I do all of my clients, not to let the pain you are feeling make you do something that is not in keeping with who you are. When a person finds out that their loved one has been cheating on them, they often want revenge, to make the cheater feel hurt. But if you do that and take it too far, well, if you do that, it can ruin your life. Do you realize that? Taking my hand, she made me nod before she continued. Don't let her mistake ruin you and the future you might have. If you retaliate too hard, you could go too far and end up in jail for a while or even prison, possibly for years. You could lose your job and almost everything you have worked for your entire adult life. You don't have children, so you don't have anything to worry about. But that doesn't mean you can't create huge problems for yourself. Whatever you decide, just be careful and remember that it's her mistake, not yours. There were so many things swirling around in my head. Treason? Confirmed. Children? So close, but not now. Revenge? Maybe not, but payback? Yes, definitely. I wouldn't be an idiot to let my anger destroy me. I'd be careful to control my emotions, but in my carefully calibrated reaction, I'd be just as damn devious and cruel as she'd been deceiving me, no matter how long she'd been doing it. I knew I would never physically hurt her. I wasn't that kind of person, but make her suffer? Yes, I will. Carefully, I mean. But believe me, Miss Hightower, if that's the way my soon-to-be ex-wife wants it, any way she can get it, then that's the way it will be. I'll try not to go too far, but believe me, it'll be damn close, and she'll feel all the pain she's caused me. Every single one. Damn. Bit. Miss Hightower sighed, realizing she couldn't stop me, but she made one last attempt to subdue me. Okay, please be careful, Mr. J-Ro. Remember what you said and don't go too far. Going over the edge is a lot easier than you think. I don't want what you do to bite you or haunt you. As a divorce attorney, Miss Hightower recommended George C. Godwin. He agreed to meet with me after hours, and I spent the next 2 hours on a bench in Piedmont Park contemplating my escape and my revenge. Then I loaded up all my notes and went to see him. Mr. Godwin was an elderly black man, as it turned out, Miss Hightower's younger uncle, and was as short, burly, and jovial as she was tall, regal, and reserved, but he knew family law up and down. He also knew the Georgia legal system like the back of his hand, as he had practiced law for nearly 50 years. George acted very informal, insisting that we call each other by our first names, and chatted for a bit before getting into why I chose divorce over attempted reconciliation. When I showed him the folder of photos, he whistled longingly. I think that answers that question. Okay, what we're gonna need. I handed him the flash drive with all the records Miss Hightower had suggested, and he plugged it into his laptop, said a few times, and then said a couple more before kissing his niece like an Italian in the general direction. This girl really knows her stuff. Trent, everything looks finished, so I'll put it all together and let you know when we're ready to file. You can do it by next Monday? Oh, I can do it by then, but overtime will cost you. Do it, please. I then told him my plan, including an additional request. When I finished, his face expressed nothing. You have to be careful, Trent, very careful. I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but you're entering into a legal proceeding where you can't go too far as the judge will decide the case according to the law. But if you don't think looks and attitude play a role, I have a great bridge I can sell you across the big river that runs through downtown Atlanta. I forced myself to smile, knowing that there was no river, big or otherwise, in downtown Atlanta. I got home late Monday night. Citing fatigue and the need to rest after a minor ailment, I avoided Reagan. Still feigning signs of an illness that wasn't really there, I showered and brushed my teeth, trying to put all traces of that slut out of my mind. Tuesday morning I got up early and, without waking her, quietly slipped out of the house to catch my flight to Charlotte. Thursday night I made the call I had been dreading. Ethan, hey, it's Trent. Listen, buddy, I need to apologize, and I need to apologize really bad. You were right, and I was as wrong as I could be. That bitch played me. Ethan, being the closest of my brothers, immediately forgave me and asked how he could help. I stayed home late Friday night and then complained that I was tired so she wouldn't even think about me. Saturday morning, I went to my parents' house to help my dad with a home project that was supposedly rescheduled for Sunday morning. I really wanted to tell him what was going on, but I knew I needed to wait until things settled down. Then the timing would be right, and it would be too late to miss something I shouldn't have. So I called Reagan late Saturday night to let her know I wouldn't be home until the following afternoon. But when she answered, I got the distinct impression that she wasn't home and that she probably wasn't alone. I held my tongue, uttering a curt but completely fake "love you" before ending the conversation. On Sunday afternoon, while Reagan was out on the street, no doubt dating one of the low-life bastards who'd engaged her, Mr. Godwin sent me a text. I quickly phoned him and he confirmed that everything would be ready. The bailiff he hired agreed to serve the papers on Monday at 11 a.m. as per my special request, and send me a text message as soon as he met with her. I immediately excused myself from work and then hit the road, leaving Reagan a note to say that I had some business at work and for her to call me at the office if she needed me. I drove to the office and spent the rest of the evening finalizing my plans. Reagan called twice that evening, and both times I told her that the case was dragging on and that I would be even later than I had told her before. I promised that I would leave early Monday morning and we would spend the entire evening in bed together. That must have been what she wanted to hear, because her miserable mood became light and cheerful, and she confessed her love to me before we finally ended the conversation. I was lying to her, of course, but given the web of lies and deceit she was weaving around me, I shook my head and said, "That's the kind of change, babe. Reincarnation is tough shit." She hissed when I got into bed with her late that night, which I knew would be the last time, but I didn't bother to wake her. After Reagan left for work, I walked through the house with a wide piece of brightly colored painter's tape and stuck a piece on everything I owned or had owned before our marriage. Anything that pertained to community property, I decided she would get as part of our settlement agreement or give to a thrift store. At 7:45, Ethan showed up, and a few more minutes later, the crew from the moving company arrived. I helped them get started, and then Ethan took over supervision while I finished packing what I needed for the short term. Everything that was in the truck would go to the warehouse. Reagan didn't notice that I cleaned out my gun safe and took everything to my parents' house to put in my dad's safe on Saturday. I was almost done and was about to leave, planning to leave the rest to Ethan, when Amy, Reagan's neighbor and friend, saw the truck and came out to ask if we were moving. Luckily, I got to her before she could look into the truck or see that I had piled a bunch of stuff in the back of my SUV in the garage. "Shh," I said with a smirk. "I'm surprising Reagan with some new furniture in honor of our upcoming anniversary. 5 years next week. I'm clearing out some old furniture and some clutter from the house before they deliver it tonight. It's a surprise, and it's a little early because of their delivery schedule, so please don't mention it to her or anyone else until she tells you herself." She agreed, smiling, and went on her way. By noon, the news would likely spread throughout the neighborhood, so I was glad that X hour was already 11. I gave each of the movers a generous tip, then shook Ethan's hand and thanked him before heading to the bank. I was there when they opened at 9 a.m. and withdrew half the money from our accounts in the form of a cashier's check. A few minutes later, I was at the credit union and deposited the cashier's check into a new account I had set up online. At 10:45, I pulled into the parking lot of an office building in Sandy Springs and opened my laptop. I had already applied for a new credit card in my name, so since the current card had a zero balance, I closed it. This took longer than planned, and as a result, I started sweating from lack of time. By 10:57 a.m., however, it was done, and I logged into our family email account where we were both listed and waited for the text message to arrive on my phone as planned at 11 a.m. "Process server, just asked about her." A reply came back that she was on her way. Another text came a minute later. "She's in the lobby now?" Almost shaking with nerves, I uploaded the already prepared message to our email. I considered going to Reagan's work email and sending the version I'd written, and really wanted to send from there, since I knew her password. But Donna Hightower's warning about going too far, and her uncle's confirmation that if I did what I wanted, I'd end up in very hot water with the judge, and maybe even in the pokey for a night, put an end to that idea. For now. The message went out to several of our friends and family. It reported that something had happened between us, and that I had filed for divorce as a result. 3 photos were included in the file rather than attached, so they wouldn't be deleted from the message. Reagan and Noah's faces were visible in each of the photos. However, again heeding the warnings about not going too far, the photos were carefully cropped and blurred to hide any salacious details. But it was quite obvious what was going on and, judging by the timestamp, when. The second message, the one I really wanted to send, remained unused on the flash drive. Finally, the message was not sent to Reagan or Noah. There was no need to warn them of the impending storm. The message was ready and looked right, so I hit send. After making sure it sent correctly, I quickly logged out, closed my laptop, and put it under my chair. My phone rang at 11:03. It was Reagan, and I answered it. "Trent, what the hell is this?" "A divorce? Why? I thought we were happy together. Did you find someone else?" I laughed at her hysteria. "You thought we were happy?" "No, I thought we were happy until I found out what you were doing." "Yeah, I know. Look on the back of the envelope I asked my lawyer to put in the package." I heard her swearing and yelling over the phone, promising me unbreakable love as she did in front of God, the pastor, and many of our friends and family at church, those now lost 5 years ago. Shit! She yelled over the phone. Shit, Trent, no. It's not what it looks like. Really? No, Trent, let me explain. No, Reagan. I don't think you have the time to adequately explain this. We're done here. My attorney's contact information is in this packet. If you need anything, feel free to contact him. I hung up and she was still talking, or rather practically yelling into the phone. When she realized I was no longer there, she called back again, and I sent the phone to voicemail. She left one message, seemingly a long one, and a few minutes later a text message from her came through. The voicemail message was all the same, denial and lies, so it was deleted, as was the message, and the 3 messages, and the next voicemail message that followed in quick succession. Not wanting to hear any more of her crocodile tears, listen to the lies, excuses, and apologies, and certainly not wanting to hear any more promises, since she had already violated the sacred that really mattered. I didn't listen to the new message or read the messages before deleting them. I then blocked Reagan's number. Immediately afterward, I dialed my father-in-law's number. Since Bob and Chessie were my friends as well as my in-laws, I didn't bother sending them a message. Hi, Bob, this is Trent. I hate to call you at work, but this is important, and I think you need to hear it firsthand, not second. And I'm going to do it now, not later, because the shit just hit the fan. I think I heard him gulp over the phone. What's going on, son? Bob, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but because of Reagan's inability to honor her marital vows, I'm forced to end our marriage. Trent, no. I know my daughter's story, but it has changed. You can't take it seriously by holding something long ago over her. Bob, I would never do that, but she has relapsed, and a very serious one at that, and not too long ago. 2 weeks ago, when I was out of town, it was like she went crazy. I have the locations, dates, and times to prove it, as well as pictures and even video of some of it. It's been killing me since I found out, and I hate to tell you this, especially over the phone, but you should know that I'm not doing this because I want to, but because I can't trust her anymore, and I can't keep this up. So I'm going to end this right now. The papers were filed this morning, and she's already received them. No. I can't believe it. She promised me she was already past this stage. There was desperation in his voice, utter denial. She promised all of us, Bob, but apparently her promises weren't weighty enough for her to keep them. If she had stayed true to them and to me, I would have loved her forever. You know that. But now it is too late, and the love I had for her has faded, dried up and faded away. However, I still love you and your wife, and I don't want to hurt you, which is why I am telling you this directly and not by email. My soon-to-be ex-father-in-law expressed deep regret for what his daughter had done to us as a couple, as well as to his family and me as friends. With regret in his voice, we said goodbye. I quickly called Chessie, but the call went to voicemail. I suspected Bob had her phone on speed dial, so I left a short message. It was now 11:16 a.m., and I proceeded with the only part of my plan that I had any doubts about. If I did this part, I would hurt a stranger who probably didn't deserve it, but if I didn't, I might end up getting hurt even more. So I put on sunglasses, a baseball cap, and a lanyard with a laminated ID for a delivery company that, to my knowledge, doesn't exist, but with Ethan's phone number at the bottom. He knew to answer Sunshine Process Serving to all calls he didn't recognize between 11 and 11:30 a.m. He knew that all unfamiliar calls between 11 and 11:30 a.m. were to be answered by Sunshine Process Serving. I popped some gum in my mouth and walked into the building. At the security desk, I said, "Hi, TC. J-Row from Sunshine Couriers and Process Serving. I have a special package for Mrs. Melissa Woolever." The guard frowned. "Such packages should go to the receiving center on the lower level." "No, that's not what the courts say," I said, doing my best imitation of Chevy Chase from the old movie Fletch. "Special service requires a photo ID and a personal signature. It's usually best done quietly, but we can make a scene if you want, and I'll end up having to run all over town to track her down, which will end up getting her in even more trouble." "No, wait," the guard said. "What do you want?" I go to her firm, meet her in the lobby, Idaho her, and get her signature. In 5 minutes, I'm out of here. No hassle, no fuss. He nodded slowly. To go upstairs, you must have a visitor's pass. I need to hold your ID while you have it. Got it, I agreed, handing him my driver's license. With some reluctance, he took it and handed me the pass. Come back at once. You'll get this back, he said, holding out my license, when you return the badge to my hand. Got it? I bowed my head to him and blew a small bubble, then turned and headed for the elevator. On the third floor a few minutes later, I walked up to the front desk at Melissa Woollever's firm. The same conversation was waiting for me there. The girl behind the counter looked even more hesitant than the guard in the main lobby, but she pressed a button and summoned Mrs. Woollever to the reception area. Noticing a trash can in the lobby, I threw away the gum and took off my baseball cap and put it in the bag I passed off as my messenger briefcase. Fletch's identity was gone. Melissa Woollever was very pretty, in her late 20s or 30s, with tanned skin, dark brown hair, and dreamy brown eyes that made me think she had Hispanic blood in her ancestry. When she entered the firm's lobby, she had a concerned look on her face. When the receptionist pointed her out, Mrs. Woollever looked at me and hesitated for a moment before heading in my direction. Joan said you had something for me to sign, she said hesitantly. No, I'm sorry, Mrs. Woollever, I'm Trent Giroux. You don't really need to sign, but I have to give this to you since it concerns you. What is it? Mrs. Woollever, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your husband was having an affair with my wife. My words were spoken in a whisper, and I held out to her a close, cropped photograph of them in bed together. In the envelope are documents that prove everything. Absolutely everything. Tears streamed down her cheeks and she shook her head in denial. It has to be a forgery. Noah promised me. It's not a forgery, Mrs. Woollever. I paid good money to a detective agency to find out what was going on with my wife and asked them to prove she wasn't having an affair after rumors of it reached me. They proved the opposite, that she was having one. Enclosed in the envelope is a confirmation that everything you see here is real, unedited, and obtained legally with my permission. I have been assured by a private investigation firm and my attorney that all of this will be taken into consideration and brought to court if you choose to go that route. As of this morning, that's what I'm doing. But he promised, she whispered, brimming with tears. She leaned toward me, and I put my right arm around her and stroked her back. He said the first time was a mistake, that it was just a fever, and that it wouldn't happen again. We took steps to make sure it wouldn't happen, and now he's backing off and doing it again? Why? I don't know, Mrs. Woolver, but this time it didn't happen in a hunch. It was carefully planned, and it happened more than once. In the envelope, you will find documents of 3 meetings between them in 5 days. Her hand clutched at my shirt, and she shook her head, short and quick against me, realizing the extent of her husband's betrayal. At 165 centimeters tall and 125 pounds, I was 7 or 8 inches taller than her. She wiped her tears and looked at me again. The flow had stopped, but her cheeks were still wet from the recent downpour. I'm sorry, what's your name? I told her and she continued. I'm about to check out for lunch and we'll go somewhere. Afterward, I'll send a picture, just of me if you want to show him. Mrs. Woollever, you are a beautiful woman, and I am honored by the invitation, even if it sounded more in anger than desire. But no, ma'am, you won't do it, I said, pulling her a little tighter against me, trying to help her get over her anger and move on to the much more important looking forward stage. I can't let you do this, and I can't do this to you. As much as it might seem like it would be revenge for him, you're going to have to live with yourself for the rest of your life, so you shouldn't go too far and do something you'll regret later. And you shouldn't do anything that the Georgia legal system wouldn't agree to. Perhaps that woke her up from her sadness because she let go of him and took a step back. I guess you're right. I gave him another chance, but this is the end, and this time we'll end up in court. I don't know how. I've included the name and contact information for a private investigative service in case you need them for further investigation or if you need someone to testify. I've also included the name of the attorney they recommended. He seems like a nice guy and has been very responsive in handling my case so far. He filed the papers and they were served this morning. Shocked, she took the envelope and thanked me, then started to walk away. However, she stopped and said, Mr. J-Ro, I hate to ask this, but can I call you if I get stuck and need advice? My number is in the envelope. After visiting the testing lab that Donna Hightower had recommended, I sweated for the next few days while I managed the project in South Georgia. It was nice to be able to rest at the end of each long day, but the thought that I might have contracted something horrible or even potentially fatal made me even angrier at Reagan and the risks she'd taken for the sake of a few, or maybe many, cheap thrills. However, good fortune came my way at the end of the week when the lab informed me that I had no sexually transmitted diseases. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least that danger hadn't gotten me down. Reagan was still trying to reach me, leaving message after message on my voicemail at work and on my cell phone from other numbers. When I checked the messages, I deleted them as soon as I heard her voice, but she didn't take the hint. When I got back to the office Friday morning, I found there were more messages waiting for me, so I deleted them one by one and pulled out my phone's owner's manual to find how to block the number. After a few minutes, that problem was solved too, and I decided to visit my parents over the weekend. They were getting messages from Reagan too, and I decided to block her number there too. My mom was especially upset, especially since she knew that Reagan and I were ready to have kids. She even asked me to reconsider the divorce, saying that what Reagan had done couldn't be that bad. I shook my head in response and showed her one carefully cropped photo that showed the date. Tears ran down her face, but she nodded, finally realizing the truth despite her desire to deny it. She hugged Daddy tightly as I waved goodbye and headed to my temporary quarters. The next day at work, Andy Smith ran into my office with the bad news just before noon. Trent, Mary Jo Bilecki's water broke, and weeks before she was planning to go on maternity leave. What do we do? Probably should have prayed for MJ and the babies, sent them a gift, and sent him home to pack since he was supposed to fill in for her during her maternity leave. Andy wasn't too happy about it, since he would have to finish his current project a couple of weeks early, but Mr. Strickland felt he was the best candidate for the job. Now Andy looked panicked, as his project was still almost a month away from such an early completion. After reviewing our project schedules, Andy and I went to Mr. Strickland with an alternative proposal. In order not to disrupt Andy's project, I would take the New Orleans job in his place, but I would be available to handle major issues on our other projects as needed, and could help out in Baton Rouge as well. In the evening of the same day, word came that Mary Jo and her new twins were doing well. I was getting closer to the Big Easy to tackle the project, and with each mile I was getting further away from Reagan and my past. By the time I got to the hotel, it was late, and I slept for a few hours before getting up early to head to the job site. I spent the morning delving into the project, meeting with a few subcontractors and going over the plans for the coming weeks. Everything was as I expected it to be, so I left early in the morning to stop at the store and head to the hospital to see Mary Jo. She had already received the flowers I had sent, so I gave her a thank you for a job well done on the project and a gift certificate for her children who had been in the neonatal intensive care unit for a while until they were old enough to go home. Although I couldn't go in to see them, I was able to see them on the monitor as MJ and Ozzy watched them lovingly. I was so happy for them, but the thought that I might never have a child of my own hurt when I left, so I turned my attention to the project. It became my everything for the next couple of days, and on Friday I took the construction office management staff out for drinks in the French Quarter after we closed down work for the weekend. On Monday, George Godwin called to see how things were going with my divorce. He was having a bad time in Atlanta. His office was getting numerous calls from Reagan trying to reach me, and he seemed to be getting more and more hysterical with each successive call. "Are you sure you don't want to talk to her?" he asked. I grinned sarcastically in response to his question and heard him practically rolling with laughter. I thanked him and went back to work. In the evening, as I made my way to my hotel room where I was staying for an extended stay, a text message arrived on my phone. I didn't recognize the number, but the message read, "Hey Trent, my lawyer filed the paperwork today and Noah has already been served. Can we talk when you get a chance? Thank you, Melissa W." It was late, so I texted back to see if she was there, but a few seconds later my phone rang. "Hey Trent. Thanks for talking to me." "Glad to, Melissa." "How are you doing?" "It's hard, but I'll manage," she replied with doubt in her voice. "How about you?" Since she declined my offer to open up, I replied, "Sounds like you." "Melissa," I asked, "what's going on?" There was a brief silence before she spoke again. "Trent, I wanted to thank you for what you did by revealing what Noah was doing to me and making me think before I committed a rash act. You could have taken advantage of how vulnerable I was in that moment, but you didn't, making me stop and think so I could realize how wrong that would have been. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your help. It's not going to be easy, but I'm determined to get through this. Melissa, we were in the same place at the time, and it wouldn't have been right for either of us. I'm better now, at least a little better, including being away from her, and I'm glad to hear, if not hope, at least determination in your voice. Definitely. I still have a long way to go, but it's definitely better than it was. Good. I started to tell her that if she ever needed to talk, she could call me, but hesitated, unsure of that. Her soon-to-be ex was a scumbag of the first magnitude, but he was one primarily for her, not me. I was just collateral damage to him when he took advantage of my ex's open invitation, but I still had plans for him as well, so I kept quiet, and we wished each other luck before saying goodbye. While the work in New Orleans was going well, I, at Mr. Strickland's behest, continued to oversee the work in Baton Rouge, and I was often asked for advice on other projects. I soon felt that I was, in Louisiana parlance, in a swamp and up to my armpits in alligators. Part of the reason was George, who called a couple weeks later and said, "Trent, there's news. Mrs. J-Ro's lawyer has asked the judge to schedule a consultation. If he does, you'll have to meet with her face-to-face here in Atlanta for at least a couple sessions, maybe more. The judge will give you time and you'll have to show up here in town or the proceedings won't do you any good. What do you want me to do?" My blood boiled at the thought of them resorting to such tactics, but George had told me from the beginning that it was possible. When we applied, we provided minimal documentation of her infidelity. You said we could hold on to the rest as we wouldn't need them. Now we might need them. What happens if the judge sees that? We'll have to give them to her lawyer, but Judge Johnson might agree to cancel the request if he has no desire to see them. Then warn him first and do it. A week later, Reagan's request for counseling was denied, although, according to George, Judge Johnson hinted that she might seek counseling for her own sexual addiction problem. And that was one crocodile out of the swamp. For the next few months, while Reagan and her attorney fought George in the Georgia court, I kept a low profile, hoping Reagan hadn't hired someone to find me, or maybe take me out. Just in case, I had George redo my will and changed my life insurance policy to ensure she wouldn't get a dime if anything happened to me. However, once Mary Jo and Ozzy's children were released from the hospital, I visited them a couple times for dinner and even babysat one evening so the lovebirds could get out of the house for some peace and quiet. The twins were quiet for the first few minutes after their parents left. But then they realized something was going on and let me take them in with all four lungs. As much as I wanted children, afterward I prayed that if the Lord would allow me to have children, He would allow me to have them one at a time. To my surprise, I also heard from Melissa Woolever several times, who inquired how my cases were going and basically asked for strength and courage to go through my own without saying a word. Because of George's laws and divorce code, George's warnings, and my personal moral principles, I was careful not to cross a line that could be construed as romantic or potentially adulterous. When things got better for Melissa, she apparently no longer needed me, and her messages stopped coming. As Mary Jo's maternity leave came to an end, I had a realtor looking for a house to buy. Using funds from my pre-Reagan account for a down payment, I bought a house in Dunwoody a few weeks before MJ returned. After spending almost 3 months in an extended stay home at the company's expense, I was determined to feel more comfortable when I returned home and be able to get my belongings out of storage. The twins were doing well when Mary Jo's maternity leave ended, and she returned to work for the last few months of the project. After handing over the reins to her, I found myself going home with 3 regrets. The first was that since we currently had no other project in New Orleans, MJ would be leaving our firm to become a stay-at-home mom for a while. Ozzy, who had relatives in the area, had gotten an assistant professor position at Loyola, so this was not a surprise. However, MJ asked me to keep her in mind if we had another job in the New Orleans area in the near future, to which I readily agreed. Second, with my return to Atlanta, I was leaving my unofficial godchildren and what had become more frequent babysitting jobs for MJ and Ozzy. The little ones had gotten used to me visiting and caring for them sometimes on weekends so their parents could go somewhere else, and I knew I would miss seeing them grow up. Caring for them reminded me of being childless myself because of the hell Reagan condemned me to. Finally, Reagan was arguing with me over the details of the divorce, and the case was dragging on, although George Godwin assured me that Judge Johnson was as fed up with it as I was, and that the end of the case was near. So when I returned to Atlanta, I immediately moved into my new home and began unpacking and doing some work during my week of free time. I met a few new neighbors, including a nice divorced woman from a house a few doors down. Having my own house gave me more freedom, but I was still legally bound to this cheating whore, which meant I couldn't start dating again without fear of upsetting the legal proceedings. I thanked Noelle, the divorcee, for the plate of brownies, but politely declined when she suggested we meet for dinner sometime. Having been through the divorce system, I think she understood me. Ethan, who had been looking for Miss Right forever and knew nothing about the Georgia court system, didn't get it. "So, when are you going to go out again?" he asked one day at lunch shortly after I returned to Atlanta. "When the judge says my divorce is final and I can be sure that romantic endeavors and any entertainment that might lead to them won't contribute a single penny to the settlement with Reagan." "So long, huh? So how's that evil bitch doing?" he asked. "I don't know, and I'm not interested." "You know you still owe her." "A big one." I looked at my best friend and nodded. "I know. And she'll get it when the time comes. Every last bit of it." Judge Johnson had finally had enough of the stalling and wriggling out over Reagan. He demanded that we both be in the courtroom for the closing speeches and presentations in early April, with Reagan and her attorney on one side of the court and George and I on the other. I arrived a few minutes early and was waiting for George when I saw Reagan turn the corner, spot me, and head in my direction. "Trent, it wasn't supposed to be like this." "I know, Reagan, but you couldn't fulfill your part of our vows, so it's just the way it is." "You've been gone so much." "Bullshit. You knew how often I'd be gone when you agreed to marry me. The 3 times during our time together when I exceeded that amount, each time by a day, I used that time to more than make it up to you. Of course, I don't count the last trip to Tampa and Orlando for those 3 times, since you made up for it yourself with your boss and your other girlfriends while I was gone and after I returned." She looked angrier than I'd ever seen her, and tears were streaming down her face. "Trent, but I had needs." Reagan noticed several people watching us and asked, "Can we go somewhere and talk about this?" "No, I don't see the need for that. You see, we talked about all this before we agreed to get married, and you promised that your wandering was over, and you wanted to get married, settle down, and start a family. You got married, sure, but you failed at that or the rest. Why don't you just get over it and leave it at that?" That's what I did. Of course, if you can't, you can always find another therapist. Maybe this one will be luckier than that one. She wrinkled her nose at my words and practically recoiled when I pointed out her failures. There were more and more people looking in our direction, so I left her standing there in tears, wallowing in her frustration when I saw George heading in my direction. "Trent, please!" she called out, but George and I headed into the courtroom, ignoring the others. The judge demanded that we both be present when the documents were signed, probably so Reagan wouldn't drag out the process. He commented on the fact that this was the first time he was seeing us together, which led to Reagan's angry outburst, followed by a pitiful cry. Judge Johnson gagged her and then forced her to hear his ruling. When it was over, the gavel fell, ending that and our 5-year marriage. I shook George's hand and thanked him after Judge Johnson left the courtroom, but as I turned to leave, Reagan started begging, making her way toward me. As I continued walking, ignoring her, she began yelling at me, spewing anger and obscenities. Most people know not to do that in a courtroom, and I'm sure Reagan knew it too, but her anger took over. I'm not sure if any of the court staff arrested her or not, but George Godwin and I took advantage of the moment to sneak out. We had the conversation she wanted so badly, though it may not have gone the way she wanted it to, and that was enough for me. I didn't want to talk to her ever again. George did his best to ensure that. After her public display, George applied for a restraining order the next day, and Judge Johnson readily agreed. I couldn't have arranged it any better even if I had tried. With a restraining order, Reagan would stay away from me whether she wanted to or not. I almost hoped she wouldn't. A brief stay at the Iron Bar Inn might do her some good. But she was too smart for that, disappeared from my life and out of sight, so the following weekend I started dating again, setting up a postponed date with Noelle. She was nice, but it soon became apparent that we had little in common, other than a very long dry spell. When I drove her home, she pulled me inside and I didn't resist. Moments later, we were in her bedroom. After the second time, we both grinned, and Noelle snuggled up to me. "Trent, we can do it again sometime if you want," she said, confirming my suspicions after dinner that she wasn't looking for anything long-term, much less permanent. I thanked her and headed down the street toward home a few minutes later. Noelle and I remained casual friends but never met again. I dated another woman the following weekend, and then another in Birmingham during a trip the following week. After each date, I felt devastated, often in more ways than one, as I realized that despite enjoying the moment, I was no closer to my goal of finding the right woman. I needed a friend, a lover, and a lifelong companion with whom I could eventually start a family. Over the next 2 months, I began to doubt that this would ever happen, that I would ever find lasting happiness. Nevertheless, short-term happiness was fairly frequent and quite enjoyable until Independence Day weekend, when I visited my parents and watched my sister, her husband, and their 4 children. Mom, knowing me better than I realized, told me that day that I would probably never give her and Dad grandchildren if I didn't change something. I know, Mom. I bought a house and I'm fixing it up. Trent, a house isn't a home yet. A man and a good woman, not one of those sluts you've been dating, can if they work at it. Son, you need to find a good woman. I know that, Mom, and someday I will. I'll find her. Just give me time. She hummed. If we give you more time, your father and I will be dead by then and never meet our grandchildren. She was teasing, at least in part, but it still made me wonder. One evening in late July, I received a text message. Hi, Trent, it's Melissa Woolever. Can you talk sometime when you have a minute? Honestly, I was surprised to hear from her again after all this time. I finished cleaning the paint sprayer and sent her a quick reply asking her to call me when she could. A few minutes later, she called. Hey, Trent, thanks for agreeing to talk to me. No problem, Melissa. How are you doing? We haven't talked in a while, which is partly why I was hesitant to send a message tonight. I wasn't sure if, with everything that's happened, you'd want to talk to me again. I laughed. Unless you were actively involved in getting my ex-wife and your husband. Ex-husband, as of today, she interjected. Together, then I don't hold you responsible for what happened between them or the disaster they created, so I have no reason not to talk to you. Good, because I swear I had nothing to do with it. And I didn't think you did. So what's the matter? Well, it took longer than expected, but like I said, I'm finally free. I even have my maiden name again, Ortiz, and I wanted to thank you for your help. You opened my eyes to what the bastard was doing, provided me with evidence for free, so I didn't have to spend money I couldn't afford to get it, and then gave me advice on what I needed to do. I went to another lawyer, but you helped me a lot, Trent, and I'm very grateful. You're welcome, so don't think about it anymore, okay? It's hard, Trent, because you were my guiding light, my inspiration, if you will, when I was so low and so depressed. I don't know you well at all, but I like what you've done and what I've seen so far, so I'm going to take a chance and do something I've never done before. Won't you have dinner with me? It was a very nice dinner, but I spent the entire evening looking at her, thinking about how sweet and beautiful she was and what kind of ex-husband the world's biggest idiot would have to be to dump her instead of thinking about what we were eating. True, Reagan was just as beautiful and had her own special sexuality. But after learning about her secret dark side, the side that would betray the man she was supposed to love more than anyone else, her former rating of 11 dropped to negative numbers. At least in my eyes. You stare, she said with a smirk. Almost as much as I do. I grinned, nodding. It's fun to focus when you have someone so nice to focus on. She blushed and covered her mouth with her hand to hide how much she liked my compliment. You want to get out of here? And maybe come back to my house? I think I'd like that. She whispered, Please, Trent, take me home or somewhere. Now. I need it and I can't wait. A few minutes later, as we turned onto her street, she reached into her purse and pulled out her cell phone. Pull into the garage, she said. The door's open. That night, we didn't leave the bed except to get a drink of water and go to the bathroom to use the bathroom as needed. I was thankful it was a Saturday and I didn't have to go to work, because for all I knew, I could have stayed with her forever. She fell asleep after our morning date and I exhaled a sigh of relief and went to the bathroom. As I stepped out, the morning light streamed in through the open curtain on the window, and I got my first real look at her bedroom. Our clothes were strewn everywhere, making me smile at the memory of our need. I also smiled at the double bed, the only item I was familiar with, and her pile of pillows, somewhat diminished by all the ones that had been knocked to the floor. The TV was on a stand next to the chair. It was tilted so she could watch it in bed if she wanted to, but it was Melissa's dresser that caught my attention. There were several pictures on it, and I cast a quick glance at them before they made me stop. It probably wasn't very polite, but I looked at one of them and picked it up to take a closer look. "Trent, what are you doing?" Melissa asked from the bed. "Melissa? Who's the girl in these pictures?" "That's my daughter Ansley. She's 3 years old and she means the world to me." Her words surprised me, startled me even, and I said, "You never mentioned her." I didn't want to bring her into the Noah story, so I tried to protect her as best I could, but she turned out to be a major stumbling block in our divorce. That's why it took so long. Trent, I don't want you seeing each other until we decide we're serious, that there's really something between us. Where is she now? I tried to keep my voice steady, but I think it went up an octave. She's with him this weekend. Why? Is something wrong? I liked her a lot, but this was a surprise, a shock even, and what it meant, well, I wasn't sure. Melissa, I don't know. I like you, though. I really like you, I admitted, not wanting to procrastinate. Considering how long we've known each other, I like you a lot more than I should. But if there's one person in this world I don't love as much as my ex-wife, it's your ex-husband. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. That's what my grandmother would have called this match. I've already told you that I really want kids, so you can imagine that I'd want to be involved in your daughter's life if things worked out. But let's think about this. If I show up to her soccer game or piano recital or cheerleading practice or school dance or whatever, who else is going to be there? Noah, she sighed, starting to realize what I was getting at. He's a lying, cheating asshole, but he loves her. Exactly. And every time I see him at one of these events, whatever it is, it'll be a reminder of what he did to my ex and what he helped do to my marriage. I will resent the hell out of him, and I think Ansley, though she won't understand, will realize that there is something between us, some tension. Eventually, she would start resenting me for it, Melissa, which would hurt any relationship I have with her, and in turn hurt our relationship, yours and mine. As much as it pains me to say it, I think it would eventually ruin everything we have. She sat up and almost in a whisper she said, realizing, "You're saying we have no future." As much as I'd like to try to prove me wrong, no, I don't think there is one, I agreed. She nodded, tears streaming down her eyes. I thought it was too easy, too perfect. Now I know it was. Please, Trent, just go away. She touched her phone a couple times and added, "The garage door will be open for you." She fell back on the bed and pulled the sheet over herself as she cried. I grabbed my clothes and dressed in the hallway on my way out, hating myself at every turn almost as much as I hated her ex-husband. It hurt, but in my heart I knew it was true. Later that day, I went to my parents' house. I gave them the short, concise version, but they both knew that I was saying more than I was, and that what I was feeling was hurting me a lot more than I wanted to admit. Mom tried to get more out of me, but I shook my head and told her it would never work. Mom, being mom, gave me a motherly hug, stroked my back, and told me everything would be okay. As much as I wanted to believe it, I didn't see it at the time. On Sunday, we met my sister and her family for lunch after church. There was a long wait for a table at the restaurant, so she pulled me aside and made me lay it out straight. She was 2 years older than me and had helped me through several failed crushes when I was in high school, so I opened up and told her almost everything, but without any bedroom action, although I suspect she had a hunch about it. I realize it's not going to be easy, she said later, but I think you can do it if you try and realize you really love her. One date doesn't tell you much, and if you had more, you might realize that there's not as much in it as you think, but it might also prove to you that there is. And that fighting for it is worth it. If you want it. Thanks, sis, and you're right. One date doesn't say it all, but it told me enough to realize that it would hurt a lot more to get close to her and then see it doomed to fail because of the past. Listen, little brother. You won't know that for sure until you try. I nodded and agreed to think about it. After that, our table was set and we didn't talk about it again, but the subject stayed in my head throughout the trip home and the days that followed. Ethan understood me better than anyone else and agreed with my thoughts on the subject, but it was on the drive home after a trip to a factory near LaGrange that I started to think about it. Considering how lucky Ethan was with women, was it such a good thing that he was agreeing with me? The following weekend, he set us up with a couple of women. We all had fun, and I didn't immediately put the thought out of my mind. During the divorce, Reagan wanted to keep our house as part of the settlement agreement, and I made George resist by forcing her to sell it since she couldn't afford the buyout without giving up a lot of other things she wanted. It was pretty petty and cruel, but I figured it was karma given the circumstances, and I didn't lose a minute of sleep over it. Since I didn't want to be outed, I also brought George in as my representative for the sale. He and Reagan's lawyer had known each other for a long time, so unlike Reagan and me, they were on good terms, and George found out that Reagan was going to buy the condo. Sometime later, I heard a rumor that Reagan and Noah were getting married. Upon hearing this news, I immediately called George as it could affect my finances. During our divorce proceedings, George argued to the judge that alimony was not due because Reagan was a cheater and I was the injured party. But the judge took our relative incomes into consideration and awarded her a small monthly amount for 5 years or until she remarried, whichever came first. I think that was the only point George lost in our settlement agreement, but even that amount was less than he predicted. If she really did remarry, I'll check it out and let you know. If it's true, we'll get the alimony payments stopped, George said. Yeah, and if it's true, it just goes to show that some people never learn, I said, incredulous at the thought of them being together and what that would mean, even though it further confirmed my decision to end my relationship with Melissa. No, George laughed. It's what keeps me in business. And I thought, it gives me a choice I'd thought about back at the beginning of the divorce but never believed possible. After hearing about their wedding, I decided to contact a friend at Reagan's firm. Will Kleiner and I had known each other since college and met again when I started dating Reagan and discovered that he worked at her firm in a different department. Reagan and I had met Will and his wife several times while we were dating and married, but Will and I hadn't seen each other since the divorce began. So shortly thereafter we met for lunch when I wasn't traveling. When I told him what had happened, Will replied, "That's terrible. I'm really sorry, Trent. I heard that Woolever asked to be transferred to another department. It all makes sense now. They're avoiding conflict with our HR department. So do you guys have an official policy on this sort of thing?" Sure. If they violate it, they could get in big trouble, and in the long run, the firm. Will, I hate to ask this, but do you think you can get me a copy of that section of your personnel manual? Yes, just don't tell anyone where you got it. The following Saturday, I made a date, and we met Will and Lori Cleaner at a Braves game. Will handed me the flash drive that night, and a few days later I went over to George's house to talk to him about the whole thing. Trent, I'm sorry. Even if you can prove that they knew Noah Woolever was entertaining all the women under him, he said, laughing at his own wording, that doesn't give you the right to sue, since that's the way state law is written. In an effort to make sex between willing partners a less dangerous crime, the state legislature got rid of alienation of affection in Georgia in '79, around the time I went off on my own. It prevents one partner from suing the other for attracting or distracting the other. That goes for the firms they work in as well. Damn. While I didn't care about the money, I hoped that financially penalizing the firm would make them penalize Noah, and with any luck, Reagan. He smiled. A lot of potential plaintiffs, upon learning that fact, have said that word or something worse. That means no one can sue them, except in a very limited number of cases where the firm was positively informed of what was going on and did nothing. In that case, someone taken advantage of by a serial abuser might be allowed to have their day in court. But the plaintiff's chances of winning a significant sum are severely limited, so much so that most lawyers worth their salt wouldn't touch such a case with a 10-foot pole either. I sighed and repeated, "Damn!" He laughed. Hey, don't give up hope. Let's deal with the spousal support issue first, and we'll talk about the other options a little later. The next week, George was at the courthouse filing a new motion. Proving that Reagan, an asshole, had obtained a marriage license, George asked that spousal support payments be terminated because they were no longer necessary or appropriate under our divorce decree. Reagan's attorney, of course, strongly opposed this motion, and we had a suspicion that the marriage certificate had been filed far away from Atlanta so that we would not discover it and file the very same motion to discontinue alimony that George was now filing. Judge Johnson agreed with us, brushing aside Reagan's objections, and I was charged the monthly amount that had kept me in suspense ever since he had demanded it. However, when I brought up the second issue, George looked at me, shook his head, and jabbed his finger at me. Patience, Trent. Patience. 6 months later, George Godwin called me and we met for lunch a few days later. Trent, I suggested you wait because newlyweds need time to get to know each other. And in a case like this, with Noah moving to another department in the same firm, he's going to be very cautious for a while. He needs time to get his bearings and find a new trail just as the luster of a new marriage begins to fade. From what you've told me and from what I've seen of guys like this in the past, I think it's a good time to run a check. It took 2 weeks, but Donna Hightower and one of her investigators proved that just as tigers don't change stripes, leopards don't change spots, or whatever the old saying goes, serial cheaters don't stop cheating. Noah Woolever had struck up a relationship with one of his new subordinates, so George took the information, put it in a nice package, and went to one of his lawyer friends. We don't want this to get back to you, Trent, because if whoever replaces Judge Johnson sees your involvement, Mr. Woolever will say, lose his job. In that case, Mrs. Woolever would be able to file for reinstatement of spousal support because of the effect your actions have had on her current spouse. I don't know how she would know that because I certainly won't tell her, and if anything happens to Noah Zasrans, I suspect he won't tell her the real reason. George smirked, wiggling his finger in my direction. Sneaky, sneaky. And it's true. George's friend, a lawyer, delivered the package to Noah's firm. Through my friend Will, I learned that Noah had been escorted out by security that same day, and there were rumors that he wouldn't be welcomed back. They say Reagan cried when she found out, asking why, but no one would say. Take that, asshole, I said after the conversation ended. If I keep this up, I risk turning into a bitter old man. Grinning to myself, I realized that was a risk I was willing to take. Not wanting to link my name to this in case Reagan found out about it and took it to a judge to try to get spousal support reinstated, I sent the package anonymously that same day, and the next evening I got a call. Trent! Melissa Ortiz yelled. I know you probably never want to talk to me again, but I had to call to tell you. Noah called last night and said that he had been laid off from the firm, due to downsizing, he said, and that he was going to file for a reduction in child support because of it. I called a friend at the firm and learned that there were rumors at the firm that he had been laid off. And today I received an express package, an anonymous, mind you, express package, which probably explains everything and should allow the judge to keep my spousal support payments the same when Noah files his petition. Trent, I guess, knows who I have to thank for that. So to that person I say thank you. I chuckled. I think if you talked to the right person about it, they'd say you were very welcome if they were in a position to admit they did it. As for what was in the package, you might say that some people never learn. I'm assuming that Noah will sing the judge a sad song about his plight, and then when my lawyer gives the judge that information in response, I hope the judge throws those very words at him. For heaven's sake, he just got remarried. I wonder if he started fornicating so quickly when we got married. Melissa, don't think so. It's in the past, so keep it there. Just smile and enjoy life, okay? You deserve it. We said goodbye for what I suspected was the last time. At that, I smiled. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. I'd been through the ordeal, I'd survived, and while some might disagree, I'd returned as much hell and heartache as Reagan and Noah had put me through, going as far as I dared, but not too far. While she was probably cheating again too, I had helped Reagan end up in a much worse financial situation, in an apartment instead of a nice house, and with a dysfunctional husband who paid alimony and child support through the nose. In addition, I knew she was in a relationship in which her spouse cheated on her regularly, but didn't bother to tell her about it, just as she didn't tell me about what she did to me. I had tried to give her the best and make her happy, but now I suspected she had more worries than she could count. Yes, I had struck back at each of them, but I regretted nothing. Not one thing? Moreover, as I went over what had happened in my mind, I realized that I no longer called them those derogatory names that were ever present in my mind. Having received retribution, I no longer thought of them or cared what they might think. And that realization led to the biggest smile of all. But the smile was short-lived, because over the next few weeks I made another discovery, the hardest of all. As much as I thought I had leveled with Reagan and Noah, to my surprise, I discovered that they still had power over me. When I thought I might have a chance at happiness with Melissa, I gave up that chance because of the memories of what my ex and Melissa's ex did, the awkwardness they caused me, and I'm sure her. Since then, I'd been on a few dates and had sex with many women, But after the raucous orgasm faded, I realized more and more clearly that I didn't care about any of it. Melissa, I finally realized, was still in the back of my mind, present in it as much as thoughts of Reagan and Noah. Even though I'd struck back and gotten my pound of flesh, I still wasn't free of them as long as I cared what they might think about anything. Not until I could look at them and laugh and say, "Look what you gave up and what I might get as a result. Thank you for being so stupid. Then I will truly be free." At that moment, it all became clear to me and I realized exactly what I wanted to do. Picking up the phone, I looked through the recent calls and found the number she'd called from the day she'd gotten the file with Noah's latest adventures. I pressed the number to call back and hoped she would pick up. Moments later, she answered. "Hi, Melissa. This is Trent J. Rowe. Can we talk?" "Trent, recently you helped me again when you didn't have to." "I'm listening." "Something came to me tonight, an epiphany, if you will. And if I'm not too late and you'll let me, I'd like to talk to you about it to see if there's any chance of making a difference." There was silence on the line, though I thought I could hear breathing, so I continued. "Even though I recommended that you let go of the past, I realized that I had been so focused on the past and what had ruined my life as I knew it that I hadn't noticed that I was looking at things backwards instead of forwards. I want to apologize to you for that, and if you agree, I want a chance to try to make things right. If you'll let me." Again, she didn't stop me, so when I talked to her that evening, I could practically hear Melissa nodding her head over the cell phone line, assessing my words. To my relief, she wasn't dating anyone new, and to my surprise, she agreed to let us start over to see how things went, and if we could eventually become as compatible as we had been that first wonderful night. We went on another first date the following weekend with good and firmly stated intentions of not rushing things, but sometimes things have their own ideas. She invited me in as I walked her to the front door. She took the glasses and I poured the wine, after which we sat down on the couch and talked until 11. A few minutes later, I was already carrying her upstairs and gently sitting her down by the bed. After that, we lay there but didn't say a word. It was too soon, considering it was only our second first date. But in my heart, I hoped it would work out, and from the way she looked at me, I thought she might feel the same way. Although we encountered some difficulties in the months that followed, it turned out that we agreed with each other on far more important things than we had realized, and that many little things don't matter when two people love each other enough. Although I thought so after our second casual date, I liked her more and more with each meeting, and eventually I admitted to myself that it really was much more than like, almost from the start. Melissa came to the same conclusion, and we began to plan and collaborate so that we could have a future together. We both wanted that, so we got married a little over a year after we decided to try again. When the time came, little Ansley became our flower girl, and Melissa and I said "I do" to each other and really meant it. As I suspected, we've run into Noah a few times since then, but it didn't quite go the way I initially feared. The first time we were close was when he started to make a snide remark to me about taking seconds, but I cut him off. In barely a whisper, so that only Noah could hear, I said, "Noah, thank you so much for taking Reagan, the cheating whore, off my hands. If you think she'll be more loyal to you than to me, you're even stupider than I think you are. And thank you for making it possible for me to be with Melissa, the real woman you weren't smart enough to be faithful to, and do everything in your power to keep her. Believe me, I got the best part of the deal." He nearly choked and clenched his fists in anger before realizing I could have torn him apart if he had hit me. Recovering in time to save Ansley and myself from severe pain, he turned and went to his young daughter. He took her in his arms and kissed her, whispering something to her before putting her back down and saying goodnight to Melissa. A few months later, he told her that he was in the process of divorcing Reagan and finally realized that what I had said was true. When he started to suggest something, she abruptly interrupted him. "Too bad you didn't realize it until after it was too late, Noah. Don't ever mention it again." In all the time we've been dating, Noah has never once said a word to me about it, but I still see a note of regret in his eyes when he sees us together. And I always smile. Present tense. Ansley is 6 years old now, and now she's at Grandma and Grandpa Ortiz's house, and I'm holding Melissa's hand while she squeezes mine like there's no tomorrow. When the doctor gives the order, Melissa makes one last push. Finally, she leans back and I kiss her sweat-drenched forehead as the doctor and nurse work a little farther away from the delivery bed. After a minute, the midwife looks at us and says, smiling, Mr. And Mrs. J-Ro, congratulations. I know you didn't choose to find out beforehand, so let me be the first to tell you that you have a beautiful baby boy. And that's when I realized that all the trials and tribulations I had endured were worth it. And I realized that no matter how hard it was, I wouldn't change a thing. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.